the past 3 weeks talking and thinking about a lot of questions together, and such as what are we doing here, and what is our relationship, who is Chris Mann, what is biography, and why are we talking about the memories of the others, and why is it relevant to us, how is the past passed on to the present, can we transfer the memory of the others and perhaps organize the future, and how can an object memory be a critical agent, and also why not prefer a version of yourself that you yourself are not.
My commiserations for using the word collaboration, or curation, or collecting an image of you only to be found in fragments, found in statements. Where is the self-oriented found? Is it in the collected words of friends, their gooey, nostalgic, sycophantic sputum, which amounts to what? Distrust or wholehearted belief? Both feel false. We can't shake the desire to know more, to find out, dig, deeper, dig. What is real? Will we be left with just another simulacra? All of us are his biographers. All of us have fragments which ring true, which resonate. You said, questions are portable, answers are sedentary. I sit with no answers, only questions. Is it wrong that I prefer my version of you? Is it wrong that I prefer my version of you? Is it wrong that I prefer my version of you? Is it wrong that I prefer my version of you?
When I arrived in Melbourne, Ron and I began doing performance series at La Mama Theatre. Once Ron and I were performing, Chris bought some little drunk from the Albion pub, known for its violent behaviour, across the road. Ron was able to pacify the drunk, and then Chris started heckling. I thought, okay, I've got to establish myself as someone who takes things seriously. And I got to tell Chris that there's no nonsense allowed. Things got pretty wild, and I advanced on him with the burning log. He got the idea I was coming at him, and I was screaming and he just split. Then I didn't hear from him. And then about 6 weeks later, after midnight, there's a knock at the door. And there's Chris, standing there going, I'm sorry, can we be friends? So we began to work together. The essential difference in our styles of working. I studied technology very intensely and tried to figure out what the compositional potential of this, and Chris came up with the idea of, is there anything we can do this?
When I met him, we were in our mid-20s, we were young. He and Warren met at a performance. I can't remember whether it was Chris performing or Warren, but something one of them said to the other made them so angry that either it was Chris chasing Warren down the road, brandishing a burning log, or Warren chasing Chris. You should definitely ask about that escapade.
I'm sure Chris sent you to me by mistake.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about being any kind of biographer for Chris.
When I say mixed, I mean mostly bad.
Mostly bad. Yeah.
Are we going to continue doing it?
This strange, halting, pausing logic between the two voices, finding the parallel text word, sometimes speaking simultaneously but often dotting between each other's texts. They weren't about agreement. More like conversation as being parallel logic, conversation between different modes of addressing and thinking.
Chris Mann is not yet dead, so we needn't shed tears on his behalf or revere him with uncomfortably excessive gusto. We are still allowed to find him annoying. He has done some living worth having a listening party about and making friends about, unlocking portals to uncharted worlds about. I've never met the guy or even heard any of his hard listening hit songs. I got this little patch of agency from a friend of a friend of a friend, and over the last few days and weeks have imbibed an inkling of his retold essence via anecdotal evidence from his friends and collaborators, especially those in the sound-generating collective Machine for Making Sense, a group deemed too radical to be a threat by the Australian Surrealist Intelligence Organisation. They set out to embody failure, to crash and burn and cause disquiet, but often succeeded miserably in having a good time. Their unpredictable stage show would make it particularly hard to sing along, and they would gladly throw spanners in their own works to watch smoke billow from their collective burning log. Chris likes to subvert himself right out of the equation where possible, so that he's a ghostly vessel for us to meet in and bounce around conversationally.
I don't know what he thinks, but I have a pretty good idea. Like any philosopher, he's more interested in the question than what comes after. He is very ferocious, to crack a joke musically. There are two ways to play with Chris. He's not going to change. His incredibly rich pitch, rhythm, colour, a smaller frame, a collision isn't really a collision at all. It's a blessing to be ordinary. As I understand it, she was very intelligent, Chris's mother, but in a very different way. She was a seamstress from Berlin who also moved to Australia before the war. His mother was a hard-nosed person, someone who can really sell something to somebody, almost non-stop. She sells things to people. Chris's father couldn't sell anything. He liked to talk about stuff. That is what I understand. Maybe a little wrong, but reasonable. The combination of these two parents is so much of what Chris is. I don't know what he thinks, but I have a pretty good idea. His mother ran a business and created some capital. She went around schools recording children, either speaking, saying a poem, or singing. They brought the professional real voice recorder. His mother got people to buy the recordings? Yes. The funny part was no one had a reel-to-reel, so buying a reel of a child's voice they could never play. I told you she was a good salesman, didn't I?
His parents ran a music store of a diversity of black jazz and Afro-American music, and lots of different folk music, or what was considered music in other countries. So he was exposed to all that and can base his rhythm on that and apply it to his sound work.
For the subject to proceed, there's got to be more than a bang of gratuitous repetition.
I think in his thinking, transience references or implies or resonates with being Jewish. I don't know what he thinks, but I have a pretty good idea. His favourite quote that I know from his father Peter is...
Wait a minute. 10,000 desires makes a purchase, is that it?
Makes one purchase.
Makes one purchase.
That doesn't really answer how long, but that's okay. How long is an interesting measure of time. We had 4 afternoons where we were videotaping her talking about herself. We weren't actually talking about collaboration, we were just talking about her. I did it because she was telling me a funny story a couple of months back. How long? And I thought someone should really record this stuff. I have mixed feelings about being any kind of biographer of her, and when I say mixed, I mean mostly bad. I'm not at all worried about revealing my ambivalence towards how long, because I think ambivalence can be very productive, an impossible and paradoxical coexistence of 2 incompatible elements. I would have liked to hear some of the funny stories, I guess. Maybe that would have given me some impetus to get out the camera. But I came into this thing blind. I didn't know how long. I could only actually make it to one of the afternoon workshops. The most important dimension of a project like this is time. When we really did work together quite intensely, How Long and I, By the end of it, I just felt kind of like, I don't want to work in this context, be her accompanist or collaborator anymore. Not that this is necessarily a bad thing. It can be really good. Meeting new people, being forced outside your comfort zone, exercising your brain and putting your skills to work for someone else. It can be good, but it is also very distracting from the problematics of your own work, especially when how long is there too. How long is obviously a strong character. Everyone seems to think so. Influential in the field of compositional linguistics, etc., etc. So if you're working with her, she could do lots of good things for you, but she can also distract you and trick you into her way of thinking. I have some of that feeling. We sit and chat and I have the video camera running. In how long situation, with her health the way it is, it makes sense to just do it and make decisions later. So I moved forward and did it, and we had a good time. What I was doing was making an archive of her in a very unedited way. Ramble, 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 all over the place. A cocktail of voices, was the way How Long described it, which sounded kind of disgusting to me. It makes me think of wet frankfurters slithering around in a
for
glass
16
bowl.
years. A very long and arduous conversations. How long? How long? But it's okay. I guess that's a kind of measure of time. How long? This is an interesting measure of time. As long as 8 years ago. A long period of time. Long years of honing a practice of listening. A long period at that stage, but that became the project. It took us a long time to work out how to play together.
Have I collaborated with him? No, but we worked together a lot. There was a lot of
people think
pleasure.
he should move on.
I feel a bit
So he
disappointed
became
with
very
myself.
annoyed with the conversation.
Frankly, I wish I'd played with him better.
Too long.
Some sort of
I mean,
How many
mic that
chances
valves
do you
out of
need?
there, so all you're left with is skittish
I have many
punctuation.
chances to play with him, and I did. He's very hard to
long
play
ago.
with me. To me,
As long as somebody is doing
it's
it
great
for
to
him.
try.
Put that
What's
pause
also
on heavy
interesting
rotation.
is that
I
every
wish
3 months
I
or so,
did better.
someone would contact Chris wanting
It's a
something.
real challenge. He's
and
10
would
years
say,
older.
I don't have it. Contact Warren.
In terms of working with him in the 90s, he was like someone reading on crack.
Whatever
pretty
I
hyped
was
up,
doing.
The
super
mad
fast.
mouth tongue, no plot, plan of
I
time.
feel I was a
myself
few years
before we
behind the
played, not to get
challenge.
carried away and to play along with him.
He's
Truthful
doing
and
what
To a
he
certain
does,
extent,
and
he
you can
used
get
to fail in that.
you can get with it alongside
You
it,
put up quite a
but
strong
you're not going
theme.
to change it much.
As an improviser, you could get drawn
The art
into
of
his
denial.
theme to be. Ended up playing
What I often try to
energetically
do is
fast as
contradict
well.
myself
Who gives a fuck?
to create a
You think
Maybe
I know
you
what the
have to
words
salt
are?
the thing
A
with
context
aspects of the
for him.
past to get it to
that can be very useful.
go.
He liked using the chainsaw.
He's ferocious.
It's true that
So,
the
the
past
third
collaborates
phase was
with
when
the
we got
present.
Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, Honeyball, the US-French technology group, to put money in. Here there's a close-up of Rupert Murdoch in a Boy Scout uniform circa 1944. Subject, the poor man's success. The separation of art from explanation. Pathos.
Jim Denley applied for money from the Australia Council, and we did a tour in Australia.
It wasn't money that fed our money.
For money from
My
the
wife
Australia
went to work at a
Council to do
delicatessen.
work. So the 4 who lived in Sydney got together and said, what do we do? Do we disband or do we keep going?
Chris and I were flying
sort
in
of
five-star,
sissy-shamed
living in five-star
stood
hotels
on
and
the
The
flying
purpose was
around.
for them to
Did
realise
it for
that
18
they
months.
could have an equal relationship with someone who was giving them money.
We were receiving capital money, thinking about developing a video conferencing system.
Put money in.
What we were doing
wasn't money
was we were
that
spying on the
fed
British
our money.
airspace in Australia and the Australian government for the French company and the government for 18 months. We didn't know. We thought we had someone investing in our creativity.
It's embarrassing
So Chris
what
and
some
I
people do for
spent
money.
18 months,
And as language
5 days, 4
is
nights together,
completely
living this
certifiable.
project. Chris viewed it as an art project. I viewed it as a business intervention project. So I was left at the end of it, with a damaged professional status, and Chris produced an art piece, which was a box called The Manual. After that, Chris and I
It
have
was
just
more
been
of a
seeing
collective
one
project.
another
No learning takes
intermittently.
place in a transaction.
We are a project. We are conversations. We are 5 individuals. We have decided to come together.
Performing an agreement is an event.
What is some of your
Each
favourite
project is different.
aphorisms from the the workshops. Like,
Do I want to embark
experimental music
on that
is
kind
not
of project?
problem-solving music; it's problem-seeking music.
Chris said to me that I forced him into this project.
Or
But we're generally able to project further than when we're
artists
faced
should
with
be
mortality
socialists
in
as
such an immediate and
citizens
confronting
and
way.
anarchists as artists.
When that happens, how far can you project into the future? Particularly the project involving transcribing a conversation.
What's the one about sedentary answers and questions?
Questions are portable, and
But
answers
that
are
became the
sedentary.
project. It took us a long time to work out how to play together. With a very complex project, it's hard to determine what goes on. Chris referred
Being
to the
impossible
balloon
was
project.
the bloody point.
Living this project,
The
Chris
tastification
viewed
of
it
thought type
as an art
prize.
project.
What was the thing about Chris organising the people?
I viewed it
I-
as a
in the
business
interviews.
intervention
This
project.
is designer's biography.
So what does a fact want to be when it grows up?
Apparently, what you got out of the spying project was different from Chris did.
What
mean-
is the difference between a rock and a stump?
Like, what
we
is the
proved
projection
was
of
two
ice?
people in a creative
Or where's
project
the
that
projection
is
of
applied
the-
to government agency or philanthropic trust, and
Destroying
the average grant to
structural
an individual
inertia
or collective
in creative ways.
1974 was $5,000,
It's only the story that's actually repressed.
depending on the project.
Chris Mann, born in 1949, is an Australian-American composer, poet and
There was a
performer.
lot of understanding about what
Specialising in
this
the emerging field of
specific project
compositional
was about
linguistics,
and
described
how I
by
should
Mann as
approach
the
scoring
mechanism
and
whereby
developing
you
work.
understand what I'm thinking better than I do.
You'd be hard put to argue that facts aren't all hypochondriacs.
You think the facts are sadistic.
I think
Are
in
the
his
walls
thinking,
perpendicular
transience
tonight?
references or implies or resonates with being Jewish.
You learn to speak by learning how to pause.
He went to a very good private school in Switzerland in the Nazi era.
For listening to be other than completely carcinogenic, it needs, knowns we know to be deleterious. So,
Deleterious.
like,
He would stumble on stage and then start talking
So
incoherently to the
carcinogenic
audience,
listening.
and then go on like this for hours. Streams of consciousness, linguistic games that would go on for hours, where he would stand in the middle of the room, point at an audience member and single out particular attendees.
Fuck the
Describe
witness.
the performer with an elaborate
You want to
theory
bother whether the absence is a found
about
object?
what he was doing, and out of Chris Mann was something to remember.
And as the subject knows, it's dots on the I, on irrational, and thereby makes a fetish of. And as a fact, is this moment of. Am I wrong to prefer your version of me? A mirror is a price, a relative of Christ. Unlike lots of better limericks, has
Eva
silver on its
describes her
side.
cooperation with
which
Chris
is not my
to be
fault.
beautiful.
At
What is your version?
15, at 15, at 15.
So how to sublimate a truth?
He told me of a beautiful
One,
metaphor.
get a
When
life.
he
said
turned up
about
at
playing with
school, the
musicians.
headmaster said, "We are
passing a
closed. Get
ball.
away. Get as
What
far
was your
away as you
version?
possibly can." Chris's father ended up going to
He
Australia.
would give us a printed
His
version
mother, on
of
the
his
other
text
hand,
before we
has-
rehearsed or played.
I understand it.
Chris's
I
version,
understand it.
but I don't think that's mine.
He has a certain flair for reducing vast, complex narratives into sticky reductions with bitter, piquant tangs,
Turned out he
funneling
was
them
an
into
artist in
potent little
residence with the
droplets of
Australian
oblique
Broadcast
intelligence
Commission,
that
where
cause
his
pops and
performance
crackles
piece
in your
was
think buds.
365
He
days
keeps
of
it
the year
juicy,
between
leaves
8
the
and
life in it.
8:30 a.m. After the news service, they played a version of Blue Moon.
Page 5 is missing.
Am I wrong to prefer your version of me? As if the institutional violence of knowing better was so much better mannered than the privatised version of the same.
Like Beckett and Joyce, both of whom were writing for intellectual audiences and were Irish, they know how good a conversation in an Irish pub can be. Chris is something similar. For example, we did go to see Wu-Tang Clan in 2002.
I was in the elevator. When it came to the 5th floor, the door opened. Chris Mann stepped through the doorway, yelling at me. When he finished, he said, "You didn't react." I said, how would you like to come with me to a meeting with the Minister for Youth and the Director of Youth Department to be my cultural advisor? When I ask your opinion, as the cultural advisor in the meeting, I want you to do exactly what you did to me just when the lift door opened.
Oh yes, it's always
I
been
didn't
a
ask who
beautiful
he was.
meeting for both of us.
All I knew that the door opened.
He'll pick you up in his buggy made of questions, drive you into the middle of the story and leave you there to navigate your own way forward. All the while telling half-truths and seeking problems to embody. I have no idea what Chris Mann smells like.
I have no idea how tall he is.
I wonder if it's on celebheights.com.
Does
I was
anyone wanna
asked if he
find
was
out?
dead previously, today.
He's not dead.
No.
That's not like an up-to-date confirmation, though, is it?
Wikipedia says he's alive.
Well, getting the attention of the dead is easy for you to say, but they just think of it as catty.
Didn't he say something about
Death is
death being
portable.
portable?
Death is portable.
Death is portable.
Yeah.
When he's dead, he's the kind of guy who's going to love being dead.
Maybe it's like a
Whether Christ
tamarind
ever
musk
fucked again
spliced
after he
with
rose from
freshly
the dead.
mulched bark,
Or was that it?
grapefruit and molten tar.
He felt like he had to carry his father.
He'll hold you to your jokes like a machine gun if you're not careful.
It just never felt we were freely improvising. We certainly weren't composing.
He'll
But
unschool
it
you.
certainly felt very different from anything I've ever been involved with.
I'm not sure
Mann
if I
currently
understood
teaches
more
the
than
Media
5% of
Studies
what he
graduate
said.
program at the New School.
I always felt like it was definitely the most stimulating musical period I've been involved in.
They had
in a cooperative
peacocks,
sense.
beautiful birds with huge tails, beautiful colours.
I felt it to be just as exciting as 1990.
Redundancy is the clue.
Debt, bet, and kept, the stations of the cross, the left felt of turn, that fucker off. I suppose I felt like a student. I always felt very good at the end of them.
All I knew was when the door opened, he had to be a creative person employed by the Australian Broadcast Commission. Turned out he was an artist in residence with the Australian Broadcast Commission. The ABC National Radio played a version of Blue Moon. That's the Australian Broadcast Commission.
Intelligence, of course, amplifies uncertainty.
I didn't ask who he was.
It's like presented with a new memory, freshly minted. Chris is a slippery vortex or an audacious charlatan. What is Citizen Kane?
I had the idea of starting out on chairs because Chris often sits when we're performing together. And the space was not very big, sort of shallow. He was sitting on his chair and I was standing on mine. And that was the beginning.
You become like an old married couple. You finish each other's sentences.
Some sort of prosthetic present.
Which one of us knows Chris Mann the best?
Okay, one.
No one was born in the jungle.
We've got a script of yours here, Warren. Do you want to be Warren?
Be Honkai.
Can someone tell the burning log story, please?
Yeah. Well, we already told that one.
Not really.
I think Warren should tell the burning log story.
But what happened with the burning log? Well, I learned this anecdote from both Eva and Chris about you picking up a burning log and chasing Chris Mann with it. Can you recall this incident?
Absolutely. vividly.
Is it when he brought that little drunk over from the Albion pub?
Can you elaborate a little bit
Okay.
On the little drunk.
Known for its violent behaviour.
We were performing. Ron McGorka and I were performing. And I had already met Chris. There's a backstory. When I was living in San Diego, just before coming to Australia, Chris came through. And he was staying with Ron and his wife at the time, Sue. And after a while, they were living in an apartment even smaller than mine. And after a while, 3 people just was too much there. So one night, Ron came over at 11 o'clock and dumped Chris on me. And the next morning, Chris and I both proceeded to get the flu. And so for a week, we were in couches across the room from each other. I was drinking orange juice, he was drinking bottled margaritas. He got better one day.
The Minister asked the Director General of Youth to put forward a proposition for Bob King Crawford.
And we're performing at Wamama, Ron and I, and Chris was being very, very scrappy. And we had the previous week, Douglas Lawrence, who's now a very respected organ player, had picked up Ron as the performance art piece, was making some boiled potatoes, and Douglas took the potatoes away from him and started smearing them on his face and Ron's face and the faces of the audience. Then the next week, Chris comes in and starts doing things, and I thought, enough is enough. And there was a log in the fireplace, so I just picked up the log and held it and just started walking towards Chris. And he didn't know what I would do, and so he thought discretion was the better part of valor. And
The
so
man
he
got
ran
up and
out the
left.
door. And so I decided, okay, well then I have to run out the door. So I ran out the door screaming and chased him about 3 blocks, at which point he outran me. He always was fitter than I was. And I came back and performed as if nothing had happened. And then, as it says in the script, I didn't see him for 6 weeks. 6 weeks later, knock on the door at midnight, and he goes, I'm sorry, can we be friends? Very simple little incident. But nobody ever broke up an event that Ron and I did ever again. I guess it worked.
Today, the economy for the common good is characterized by 5 bottom lines: social, economic, environmental, cultural, and civic. How can you bring normally
Complacent
competitive
fiction,
capitalist interests
fiction,
together without a conversation about ideology to pursue the common goods? So we're working in this space back in the 70s and 80s. That was the second part of our friendship.
reverberant space, atrium space, of space or time. The space was very different. The space between us, charged space. The space was not very big. Charged space opens up between us. Future as an interesting space. Performance space in Sydney. There wouldn't have been space for Amanda's text. The cooperative nature of us coming together had a lot to do with creating space for each other and still maintaining the integrity of individual input. Fractious space, rehearsal space, same space, collaborative space.
It is not
So
tangible.
we were working in this
can't
space
take
back in the
hold of it,
70s and 80s.
but it seems to happen. It's not tangible.
What we were doing was we were spying on British airspace in Australia and the Australian government for the French company and government for 18 months. We didn't know. We thought we had someone investing in our creativity. But Chris and I spent 18 months, 5 days, 4 nights together living this project. Chris viewed it as an art project.
He said he wanted
I
to be
viewed it
interesting as a
business
threat.
intervention. So I was left at the end of it with a damaged professional status, and Chris produced an art piece, which was called The Manual.
After that experience, adventure, formative conceptual journey, and damaged professional status,
Economic space, cultural space.
Chris and I have been seeing one another.
That memory is a
Name
difficult
space
idea.
sentence to hold these words together.
I mean, it's not like Grace remembers anything.
Indifference being the other word for space.
I mean, saying something to no response, only to have it repeated 2 minutes later.
Formalist, abstracts as space.
There is, of course, the science to not knowing. Freezing, I don't know. Weather with capital or some other protocol is
I mean,
understandably
it takes a
neurotic.
paranoid to invent space.
We kept being told you're 30 years ahead of your time.
Numbers, but are great.
So that's
They're
bullshit.
viral and they repeat.
We're where we are now, so we're quite strong. We're doing this now, and it ends.
I'm not sure if I understood more than 5% of what he said. It wasn't because of the accent. I'd grown up in Australia. I just couldn't follow where his mind was going.
So, what's the digital half-life of actually, doesn't matter. Digital is the lurking quasi-goop that occupies, there's that word again, that occupies what the psychology for the weird coincidence of pause. Put that pause on heavy rotation. That occupies search. Privatized search. Actually, if an ad is. So
what
while it's
does the
possible to
digital
use
do
tennis
at
to
night?
compute whatever, who's going to town in the third race, utility, it'll be tactically, I mean, symmetry is not the only annoying complication. I mean, there's no performance, no learning takes place in a transaction. I mean, for cash to be a general purpose password, it'd have to be protected as free speech and therefore there'd be no pass at all, unlike a bunch of numbers.
Initially, it was called "What is the difference between a rock and a stump?" Possibly the worst name ever invented. I think that was down to Rick. Thankfully, once we got the grant, I was on the phone with Chris and he said, "What about a machine for making sense?" We all went, "Oh, thank God."
He is a spoken word artist, a strange and at times aggressive, passionate man, an enduring fascination for language and particularly the Australian vernacular, interested in education, communication and information theory, dense and complex yet occupying primarily simple idiomatic frames of reference. He has early international success with both Karl Heinz Stockhausen and John Cage showing interest in his writings and later setting some of the work to music. Spatial fracturing of language, explorations into linguistic meaning, maintaining a constant polemic with his peers. The problem is defined as an idea that is to be pursued systematically. Little respect for outcomes and results with no guarantee that they will be interesting. His work is experimental in the sense of being motivated by curiosity and because the aesthetic and critical aspects are subservient to the exploration of an idea. Approaching composition from linguistics and information theory, deconstructing language structure, providing a nexus between composition, language, conceptual art,
A field of orange
demonstrating
metaphors.
the potential for a synthesis
Exhausting
through
words.
collaboration.
He liked using the chainsaw. And trekking through the bush. He's very passionate about the land and the physicality it brings him.
I am past understanding the words he blurts out. I don't even care. I would take a risk not worrying about it.
In Brisbane, more people say dance, but in Adelaide, they say dance.
Oh, we say dance in New Zealand too.
Dance.
Dance.
Mm.
There are two ways to listen to Chris and to perform with him. One is he's not going to change.
Chris was at
not
Dan's
open.
house in Melbourne.
If you're throwing a ball to someone who is
in
moving,
theatre and dance. It's
in a
quite
sense,
easy
he's
to
not
create a
moving.
situation.
have another
We
another
have
way
a
to
number
look
of
at Chris
things
is
happening and give the audience a choice.
when you're expecting from a violin, high, low, fast, slow, he shrinks the frame by 6 by 6 mil. You accept that within that frame, Chris is incredibly rich. That's the problem for people to listen to him. They're prepared for a scale they're used to musically. If you can get past that, you can just shrink or make the frame smaller because it's completely relative anyway.
In
Pitch,
terms of
rhythm,
silences, there's empathy.
colour. If you can just accept that
He
and
gives
just
an
look
impulse, or takes
within
an
the
impulse.
smaller frame, he's incredibly rich.
He is very
There
ferocious.
is a collision or play between the extraordinary,
So setting
intellectual,
your own path
avant-garde
is a
and the
good thing.
everyday, ordinary spoken speech.
There are two
I
ways
think
to
anybody
listen
to
to
say
Chris
anything.
and to perform with him.
It's probably the most amazing
One
thing
is
that
he's not going
happens
to
on this
change.
planet.
He is not open. If you are throwing the ball to someone who is moving, in a sense he is not moving.
We did go to see the Wu-Tang.
However, another way of looking at Chris
Honeywell
is
ball.
you are like expecting from a violin high, low,
The ball
fast,
throwing
slow.
metaphor you used.
He shrinks the frame by
Do you
6
feel this way while
millimeters
working
by
with
6
Chris?
millimeters. You accept that within the frame, Chris is incredibly rich. That's the problem for people to listen to him. They are prepared for a scale they are used to musically. If you can get past that, you can just shrink or make a frame smaller because it's completely relative anyway. In terms of space or time,
Your ears would try to accommodate
everything,
4
pitch,
other paradigms.
rhythm, colour.
You said
If
about
you can
playing with
accept that
musicians as passing
and
a
just
ball.
look within
What
the
was your
smaller
version?
frame, he is incredibly rich.
Talking about soccer or
There is a
basketball,
collision
only
or
ball
play
game or
between
team
the
game.
extraordinary intellectual avant-garde and the everyday
You don't pass
ordinary
the ball to
spoken
where the
speech,
person
which
is.
is
You
really
pa-
a
you
collision,
pass it
which
to
isn't
where it's
really a
going to
collision
be.
at all.
I met him the first time in Australia. Always when I knew
ball
him,
throwing
he had the
metaphor.
Chris Mann thing.
What remains if it's spoken of?
If you think of
What remains if it's
anybody
spoken of?
to
you
say
were throwing the ball to
anything, it's
someone
probably
who's
the
very
most
famous
amazing thing that
sentence
happens on
on
this
this
planet. Whether writing a book
What
or saying
remains if
good
it's
morning,
spoken of?
Honeywell
there's
ball.
not much difference.
What remains if it's spoken of?
Gary Foley, Des
What
Ball,
remains if it's spoken of?
Darcy Cassidy. I mean, I knew all these guys.
So
Yeah,
given
they
a
had files on
choice, would you rather be cause or effect?
It turns out that ASIO had files on all of them.
They weren't
I
about
thought
agreement,
ASIO
more like a
meant the
conversation.
Australian
It's
It's
Surrealist
being parallel logic,
Intelligence
conversation between
Organisation.
different modes of address and thinking, and on a whole range of ethical issues to do with language. We'll just pick up the phone and talk. Often pick up the phone and off we go. We could break into areas we could not anticipate until we started talking.
I feel like I'm falling in love with my illusion of Chris.
I also love the fact that it was free. I love the play between. Deep love for him.
Can we love our friends without expecting to be loved back? It helps to be loved back.
It does amplify one's feelings in terms of love,
I like it that Chris loves me back.
but it won't make me love him more. I love him with great depth and generosity that won't change.
Is it wrong that I love your version of me?
Can we love our friends without expecting to be loved back?
If they're dead.
Friendship
is
grows,
portable.
love grows. Gonna love being dead. How is it that love is not a declension of work?
He carried his
I
father.
just love the way Chris examines language, which isn't my forte.
But it won't make me love him more.
Each day for 365 days of the year between 8 and 8:30 a.m. After the news service, the ABC National Radio played a version of Blue Moon.
As the older guy in Kung Fu Hustle says, it's a blessing to be ordinary.
There's this bit where you talk about Hong Kai. He insisted on the difference between cooperation and collaboration. And he always hated the word collaboration because it implies the impossibility of working with your enemy. But I sort of know what that means, but I don't quite. Does anyone have any way to flesh it out?
Maybe it means that you don't have to have the exact same outcomes in mind, or that it can't be outcome based in order to work with someone, where if you're collaborating with someone, you have the same outcomes in mind. But if they're your enemy, you'd have opposing outcomes in mind.
Continue working together, be working together, of working together. While working with Chris, time working in South was working on the enjoys working with, of working with your, of working together. We're working in this space of working with Chris. intense working together, problem working with, are working on your own, relationships working, start working in working with Chris.
Can you do that with he was, and then see what?
Because he was telling, obviously he was into, he was just talking. Kid, he was involved. 90s, he was here. 90s, he was like.
90s.
Time, he was. Clement, he was. All, he was. Chris, he was. Peace, he was working.
Chris, he was.
Shallow, he was sitting.
He kind of defined composition
Periods,
as
he
playing
was
with time.
attached. Who he was, all I knew. Out, he was an artist in.
Reshaping
So he
the
was
time.
exposed.
Juggling the
Because
time.
he was drunk. And he was heckling us. And he was acting in a... But he was there with a...
The therapeutic, retroactive transference of facts.
I mean, sitting there, generating some user algorithm, getting paid. As if the subject, but some rented scapegoat. I mean, absence will do.
Maybe biography is portable.
Memory. The acquired immune response. The bacterial mood. And the other comfort cancers of patterning. Inflammations of the tongue, stress, and the general depressive obesity of nouns. And their associated infections all take a number. Bit too much like a left-handed lottery ticket for me. I mean, the sets are also fucking needy.
Are two people ever equal enough to collaborate?
Both require generosity. Collaborating, cooperating.
Unlike a bunch of numbers, 2 always and only constitutes information.
Dear Freud, having a wonderful time. Wish you... The subject, the target, then is a tech, which is great, unless, of course, you want the job.
Intelligence, of course, amplifies uncertainty. In other words, it negates information.
Music, what the poor call history.
Here, there's a close-up of Rupert Murdoch in a Boy Scout uniform circa 1944.
We would, of course, be happier if this wasn't news.
Now, it's true that the past collaborates with the present. Well, more than kibitzing.
That was an ergonomic breath.
That was a psychological breath.
Well, is it fair to declare the data conscious?
And as knowing collapses the subject.
I feel like we just lost momentum.
Say anything about what Chris looked like.
Someone said he looked like Frank Zappa when he was younger.
Citizen Kane.
Apparently he has crazy hair. Is that right?
Any
I
references
don't
to
know.
his hair, Nathan?
Anyone describe him?
I don't think so.
The hard questions.
The important questions.
Would it be wrong to have a picture, I take it?
We do have a picture.
Under our pillows.
Is it wrong if I prefer my version of you?
Is it wrong if I prefer your version of me?
The beauty of beauty is that you can do it for me. that's just bourgeois appropriation, this pissing in the pocket. I mean, I couldn't liberate a fucking paper bag.
A cure is a symptom with a short memory, after all, and only recently baptized into relevance. And because 5 is necessarily greater than 3, therefore there's more than 3 letters to its name. And anyway, it doesn't even matter if it's a 5, 10 or 20, it just wants its face on the bill. And just as 3 is a projection of 5, like water is a projection of ice, a word's a projection of the... So what does the digital do at night?
I mean, it's not you at all. It's thought is the fucking speech impediment. You're just the bill, the product. It's true that the past collaborates with the present. A DIY transcendence, plainly unintelligible. Because the subject is but a cute, summary come bad object, the maliciously ordinary.
I mean, it's not like Grace remembers anything, though memory is a difficult idea. False memory of being useful round the house and stuff. Short memory, after all, and only recently baptized into relevance.
Who's Joan LaBarbera?
I'm not sure.
Who's Joan LaBarbera?
Like the American singer Joan LaBarbera?
Yeah,
Like the American singer Joan LaBarbera?
like the American singer Joan LaBarbera.
Yeah.
She's an American singer.
She's an American. Like the American singer Joan LaBarbera.
Just Google Joan.
They put me in contact with a lot of people, like the American singer Joan LaBarbera.
How did you decide to play together?
We didn't.
So
You
we
just
began working together, playing together. Chris together was completely intriguing. Worked together in ways working together, interests together without a conversation or ideology to pursue the common goods. Nights together living this project, Chris viewed it as an art project. I viewed. Come together again, come together in an economic space, words together, held together for forensic, working together, the essential difference in styles of working. Chris together, we're both interested in making things problematic, worked together, we've finally found a language. Working together, all living in different parts of the world, what would happen? Get together with Eva and we would just look at each other and she'd work together. Same thing would happen with Chris after 20 years, we'd just be.
What was that thing about the internet guy?
Being offensive. He's pretty good at that. We have maintained a friendship since that time that doesn't require much contact with one another. We had 3 periods of intense working together. 1981, Chris and I formed a business in 1981 called Arts Technology Exchange. That's when we started the conversation about what we would now call internet. We started having a conversation at that time about what it would be like to be doing what you and I are doing now, video conferencing from different parts of the world.
How far did they get with that internet?
Wasn't the guy like a bad businessman that he was doing things with?
That's what we said.
Well, it's obviously that he was left with a damaged reputation.
We were spies apparently.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Who were you spying on?
The French?
The French were spying on the British and the Australians were making money out of it both ways. And we just got the residual bit of interest.
The internet.
What did you call the internet at that time?
We called it the internet because we were working in Unix. So it's just that this cost $300,000
$150K each. And the little Connect cost $50,000. So we're trying to get it down to $5,000. What did this cost? 500.
This is an iPhone.
You say word spies.
Someone said something about time before.
Past collaborates with the present.
Bit of now and then.
Who last spoke to Chris in the most recently?
Within the month.
So you've got his number here.
I've got his number.
Cool.
I'm sure whether it's in tune. And he is alive. Just.
Very just.
Very just.
Very tough.
Didn't you say that he said that he was thankful and embarrassed by this project?
He said, well, I got an email from another friend of ours, and he said he was in New York. The email was 2 days ago, and he said 2 days ago he was in New York and he visited Chris, and Chris had a full head of hair, which Chris assured him was not the case 6 months ago. And he said that Chris was very healthy, and he was faintly embarrassed by this project.
He emailed me saying that he's ruminating on humility.
On what?
It's wrong that I love your version of me.
I first heard Chris on Classic FM, on Julian Day's program, about when he first started broadcasting on Classic FM. And he was using the lingo of an Australian in a way that I hadn't really heard before.
Can you give us an example?
Nah.
He got a contract once from NASA because they were trying to teach the astronauts how to speak rapidly so they couldn't use much oxygen.
Is that true?
True.
Wow.
But that you use more oxygen when you speak rapidly.
Only if you speak for a long time.
Can you give us an example?
Can you elaborate a little bit?
It'll take too long.
Can anybody do an impression of him?
I'm okay with you guys leaving. I'd be pleased if you stayed too.
Any questions?
How do you feel about this project, Conkai?
I couldn't really tell you now.
Did we successfully fail?
As the instigator, you must have had some expectations.
Do you feel like Chris was in the room at some point?
He's still alive.
He's safely half a planet.
I mean, some feeling of him.
2 years ago, Chris came out and did a seminar for us at Fox Hill. He walked in front of a room of 60 students and said, Any questions? We just stood there silently until people started asking questions. And it just went from there.
We got that money for that project from Honeywell Bull and News Corporation by taking a box which had words all around it, printed, and there was a glass inside the box, and inside the glass there was those little match, thingos, and a piece of telecommunications wire. And we walked in. Chris was in. He would, as he often still does when he was back in Melbourne at that time, he was still wearing. I don't know whether they'd been laundered or not, but he was still wearing spaghetti western long johns and a suit that he'd got from an Anglican op shop. Always preferred Anglican op shops. Don't know why. And I was wearing a double-breasted Xenia suit that I would buy from an SP bookie on Acland Street because the quality was there, but the price was not. And so we walked in together, and together we put this box on the table, and together we opened it. Matches out, a bit of wire out, and glass out. Oh, the glass had the code for the software programming on it. And if you didn't understand the code, you read the manual that was written on the outside. And we just, like he did, we stood there. We thought they might ask us to sit down, but there were 2 chairs there. But they didn't. And eventually they asked us what we wanted. So I said, well, we want $250,000 to put it back together so we don't have to be in the room with you and you can see us and we can talk. And they gave us the money.
Now what did you give back?
The code. And the code we took from, might be a little inaccurate here, but we took it from, Ross, what were the recorders in like 1987, Sony? They were DAT, were they DAT tapes or DAT?
Yeah.
DAT tapes. Yeah. So, yeah, and then we took something that was written on a Sony DAT tape manual, and something that was written on a Sony Walkman manual, and something that was written on this big Sony video camera manual. And we got my dear friend, the late Fred Emery, to write a critique of the proposition that these 3 things could be put together. I mean, the people that gave us the money could have gone to Myers and bought the solution. And we told them that. We were honest, we were transparent. We couldn't believe the degree of intrigue that created.
What do you think he thinks about when he's alone?
Oh, take that one alone. What does Chris think about when he's alone? One word.
To quote him, it's so funny being right.
When we walk along through our board meetings, we would always walk along the boardwalk. He would say there was no virtue in being right. But he usually thinks he's right. do you think he thinks?
Possibly something similar. It must get awful boring after a while, though.
The most dangerous thing is not agreement. The most dangerous thing is not agreement. One time I was working with Chris, and it was a very long text. I was doing modifications of his voice. We performed it a lot, and actually got to know the text really, really well. And one day I was putting the words, wrapping the words around my head, and hearing them one way and hearing them another, and suddenly they clicked into place as meaning one particular thing. And suddenly went, Chris, if you mean it like that's really reactionary and very, very dangerous, and he went, my favorite quote from him is still a very, very early one. Meaning is such a pissy little concept and cannot walk the assumption is material.
We've gone quiet.